in North Florida to eat other invasive snakes.
Yeah, okay, the ones that were set free were raised in Lake County and then brought up there. Fox 35's Randy Hildreth explains why this is so important.
Walk far enough into the sawgrass and your ears do this strange thing. They start hunting, reaching for a noise that ought to be there, the way your tongue reaches for a tooth that just got pulled. The Everglades was supposed to be a racket. Raccoons crashing around in the palmetto at dusk. Marsh rabbits kicking through shallow water like little engines. Deer drifting through the cypress at first light, breath visible in the cold air. Every acre humming with restless, busy, ordinary life. Now you stand in the same places and there's nothing to listen to. The biologists have a phrase for it, but the phrase is a polite jacket pulled over something ugly. Faunal collapse. Strip the language down and what they mean is this. The animals aren't fewer, they aren't reduced, they are gone. In some corridors of the park, mid-sized mammal populations have crashed by more than 90%. Run the survey in the wrong patch of swamp and you're looking at 99. That kind of silence doesn't show up on its own. Something has to make it. And here's the part that, if I read it in a novel, I'd probably roll my eyes at. It started with 6 snakes. 6 Burmese pythons, each of them probably no longer than your arm at the time, slipping out of a damaged wall in 1992. 6 animals into a Florida night. Nobody chased them. Nobody filed the report that would have mattered. Nobody at the table said the sentence that needed saying, "We have to fix this now, this week, while it is still small." And those 6 animals, or the babies of those 6 animals, or whoever else slipped out around the same time, became a population that researchers now place somewhere between 100,000 and 300,000 individuals crawling through southern Florida. 6 to 300,000 in about 40 years. That isn't a pest problem. That isn't even a wildlife management challenge with a budget and a timeline and a solution at the end. That is a slow-motion catastrophe that nobody had to allow. And the story of why it got allowed says something deeply uncomfortable about the way human beings handle a problem that feels abstract right up until the day it isn't. Let me back up. Burmese pythons are native to Southeast Asia, southern China, Myanmar, Thailand, Vietnam, down through the islands of Indonesia. They are one of the largest snake species on the planet. A grown female can hit 18 feet. Some animals push past 20. The big ones run over 200 pounds. They aren't venomous, but they aren't trying to be. They are ambush predators, constrictors. They can swallow a white-tailed deer whole. I'm not exaggerating for effect. There is documented photographic evidence of exactly that. And the first time you see one of those pictures, your brain genuinely has trouble accepting that what it's looking at is real. In their home range, all of that is held in check by climate, by habitat, by competitors, by predators that grew up alongside them across millions of years of mutual adjustment. Pull the snake out of that system. Drop it into a place that has never seen its silhouette before. A place where no predator recognizes it as dangerous, no prey species knows the scent of it, and the winters are mild enough to let it breed year-round. What you have in your hands at that point isn't a snake. It's an engine without a governor, sitting in a room full of fuel. Through the 1980s, Burmese pythons were one of the most popular exotic pets in the United States. They were coming in by the tens of thousands every year. Pet shops sold them. Backyard breeders sold them. People kept them in apartments, in suburban houses, in trailers on the edge of town. The babies are, honestly, kind of beautiful. Patterned brown and gold, mellow, easy to handle when they're 3 feet long and eat a frozen mouse once a week. The problem is they don't stay 3 feet long. They grow fast. They keep growing. They keep eating. A lot of people who picked up a cute little baby bay python in 1987 were, by 1989, sharing their living room with a 7-foot animal that eats rabbits and is watching the family cat with what can only be called professional interest. Some of those people sold the snake. Some surrendered it to a shelter. Some loaded it into the car, drove south to the Everglades, and let it loose, because that felt natural, sending a tropical animal back to something that looked like nature. This was going on through the late 80s and into the 90s. Sporadic, scattered over a lot of ground. Not yet enough on its own to set up a breeding population that could hold. Then Hurricane Andrew arrived. August 24th, 1992, Category 5, one of the most destructive storms in American history up to that point. Winds topping 165 miles per hour, and it did not negotiate with anything in its path. Homestead, Florida City, the southern edge of Miami. Whole neighborhoods flattened. Power out for weeks. More than 40 people dead. $26 billion in damage. Somewhere inside that mess, a commercial python breeding operation, a facility raising Burmese pythons for the pet trade, came apart. Enclosures breached. Animals out. Some accounts put the number at 6. Some accounts say it was more. The exact number got disputed later, mostly because nobody in the middle of a Category 5 hurricane was carefully cataloging escaped reptiles. But what we know for sure is that snakes got out into the wild at exactly the moment the rest of the conditions were already cocked and waiting for them. The trickle from pet releases suddenly had reinforcements, new animals, new genetic material, new numbers. And the Everglades, already worn down by decades of drainage projects and agricultural runoff and housing pushed right up to its edge, gave the snakes precisely what they needed: warmth, shallow water for cover, endless prey, and a landscape so huge, so flat, so impossible to survey that you could lose a 20-foot animal in it without trying. For more than a decade, almost nothing happened in public. A python turned up here. A python turned up there. Biologists noted them in field reports. A few papers raised the possibility of a self-sustaining population, the way you'd raise an awkward subject at a dinner party. No alarm, no coordinated emergency. No moment when somebody with real authority sat down and said, "We have a window right now, and that window is closing. And if we don't slam it shut, we are never going to." The window shut around the year 2000, maybe a bit before. The exact date is blurry because the snakes crossed the line from possibly establishing to permanently here without anyone marking the page. That's how invasive species work, and it's part of why we're bad at them. By the time you can prove there's a problem big enough to justify a serious budget, the problem has already passed the point where a serious budget would have been enough. You go from "this is concerning" to "this is permanent," with no clear border between, and afterward it is very easy, very clean, to look back and point at the line you should have drawn. By 2004, pythons were being pulled out of the park regularly enough that the National Park Service started formally counting removals. By 2006, there were enough documented captures and enough nesting activity that scientists were openly describing an established breeding population. By 2008, the peer-reviewed literature was reaching for phrases like rapidly expanding range. By 2010, population models were projecting how far this animal could push across North America, and the projections were bad enough that they made the mainstream press for about a week before something else came along. A 2008 United States Geological Survey study estimated Burmese pythons could eventually be viable across roughly a third of the continental United States. The whole Gulf Coast, up into North Carolina, pockets as far west as California. Not because the snakes were about to march north tomorrow, but because climate change keeps nudging the line of survivable winter temperatures further inland. And once you have 100,000 animals already established at the southern tip of a state, you have a reservoir that doesn't need much encouragement to push outward. But the full size of what those first escaped snakes had set in motion, what the Everglades had been quietly losing for 15 years, didn't land for the public until 2012. A team led by Michael Dorcas at Davidson College published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. The method was almost old-fashioned in its simplicity. Drive the same routes through the park that biologists had been driving for decades. Count the same species. Compare. What came back was, in the words of one of the co-authors in an interview afterward, staggering. And staggering is not a word a working wildlife biologist throws around lightly in front of a microphone. In the areas the pythons had fully colonized, the declines were almost impossible to fit into your head. Raccoons, down 99.3%. Opossums, down 98.9%. Marsh rabbits effectively gone from the server corridors. White-tailed deer, down 94.1%. Bobcats, down 87.5%. 99%. Read that one again. An animal that, 10 years earlier, was one of the most common mammals in Florida. The raccoon you used to see in every camped ground, every parking lot, every suburban backyard, reduced to statistical static across the surveyed land. And raccoons matter for more than being everywhere. They spread seeds. They scavenge and push nutrients back into the soil. They feed hawks and alligators and bobcats. They are a load-bearing strand in a web. Pull them out, and the animals that depend on raccoons start to wobble. And the animals that depend on those animals start to wobble. And you do not lose one species in isolation. You start a cascade that takes decades to fully express. And by the time you can measure the end of it, you are looking at something fundamentally different from what stood there before. The snakes weren't only eating, they were rewriting, restructuring the food web of one of the most important wetland systems in North America, one ambush at a time. There's something specifically dangerous about Burmese pythons as invaders, and it goes beyond their size. They are generalists in a way that is almost frightening. The babies eat small stuff, frogs, lizards, nestling birds. The teenagers move up to rabbits, rats, wading birds. The big adults take deer, large wading birds, and alligators, not as a fluke, regularly. There are documented encounters between full-grown Burmese pythons and adult American alligators, animals that have been at the top of this ecosystem for millions of years, that end either in a draw or, in more cases than I find comfortable, with the python winning. A species that can fight an alligator on its own home water is not a species you are going to address with a bounty program and a public hunt. Florida has tried. I want to be clear about that, because it would be lazy to make this only a story of failure. The state has put real money, real institutional weight, and real effort into the problem it helped create. The Florida Python Challenge runs as an annual event, registered hunters, cash prizes, media coverage, the whole spectacle of public participation. In the 2020 challenge, more than 750 registered participants pulled 223 pythons out of the wild across 10 days. That sounds like a number, until you put it next to a conservative estimate of 100,000 animals living across 1.5 million acres of swamp. Most of them invisible in water and grass, where a 20-foot snake can vanish completely from an aerial sweep. The math doesn't work. It was never going to work. There's a small team of state-contracted professional python hunters working the park full-time. They use dogs with extraordinary scent detection. They use radio telemetry on captured snakes to find breeding aggregations. They are very good at what they do. They are not going to solve this. The biology won't allow it. A single female Burmese python can lay between 50 and 100 eggs in one clutch. The reproductive output of the established population overwhelms any removal effort operating at the scale we can currently fund. Scientists are looking at more aggressive tools. Engineered pathogens, infertility viruses, gene drive technology, which in theory lets you push a heritable change through a wild population. A change that spreads by ordinary reproduction and could, across enough generations, collapse the population from the inside. All of that is still in research. All of it carries its own risk. The same ecological caution that says the python release was a catastrophe should make us deeply careful about turning loose a self-propagating genetic modification into a wild ecosystem and crossing our fingers that it does exactly what the model predicts. There's a version of this story that doesn't get told enough, and I want to sit on it for a second. The python invasion happened in public. It was not hidden. It was not classified. For roughly 15 years, call it 1992 to 2007, scientists watched the thing unfold in real time. They published. They gave interviews. They sat in interagency meetings and submitted reports. And the collective response from the people with the authority to act was, in essence, we'll monitor this. We'll study it further. The window for aggressive early intervention, which would have cost a couple of $1 million, a few years of focused work, and a decision to take a small problem seriously, closed while everyone waited for the evidence to become impossible to argue with. The federal import ban on Burmese pythons didn't get enacted until 2012, 20 years after Hurricane Andrew. By then, the population was already past saving. This is not a Florida failure, particularly. This is the shape of how human beings handle slow emergencies versus fast ones. A hurricane hits and the National Guard moves inside hours. 6 snakes get into a swamp and 40 years of incremental response follow, because the damage is invisible until it is irreversible, and invisible damage doesn't generate the political pressure that fires and floods do. By the time the Dorcas paper put the 99% figure in front of people's faces, the conversation had already shifted from prevention to management, from saving the system to containing the loss. What's irreversible is genuinely irreversible. You cannot put the raccoon population back on any timeline that matters to a person alive today. You cannot unrun the cascades that have already played out. The Everglades that exists now is not the Everglades that existed in 1990, and it will not be in any human lifetime. What the ecologists are doing in the park now isn't restoration, it's damage limitation. It's a long, careful negotiation with a new reality nobody chose and nobody voted for. And here's the bitter little twist, sitting in the middle of all of this, the one I can't stop turning over. Burmese pythons are listed as vulnerable in their native range in Southeast Asia. Habitat loss, hunting, the wildlife trade. The wild populations in Myanmar and Thailand are in real trouble. The animals bred in American facilities, sold as pets, set loose into Florida waterways. Those animals are, in the most uncomfortable sense possible, thriving. They found a place where every condition was perfect, where nothing could stop them, and they filled every square mile of it. The same species. 2 corners of the planet. Opposite trajectories at exactly the same time. 6 animals in 1992, 300,000 4 decades later. A 99% collapse of the raccoon in one of the most studied wetland ecosystems in the country. Working biologists reaching for words they don't normally use on the record. If there is something to walk out of this story carrying, and I think there is, it isn't really about the snakes. The snakes are snakes. They did exactly what their biology and their instincts told them to do, in a place that had no defense against them. The thing to carry is the shape of the failure. The 15-year window when the problem was real but still fixable, and the steady, reasonable-sounding accumulation of delays that closed it. The meeting where somebody said it's still early. Let's study this more before we commit resources. The import rule that took 20 years. The difference between what early action would have cost and what permanent management costs, multiplied across decades. That shape is not Florida's alone. It isn't snakes alone. Right now, in some monitoring report sitting on someone's desk, there is a version of 6 snakes in a swamp. Something established, something spreading. Something that hasn't quite reached the threshold yet, where the official response becomes urgent. And the question that story keeps asking, the one without a clean answer, is whether we've learned anything at all about what it costs to wait. if any part of this stuck with you. If you're sitting there feeling a little colder about silence than you did 10 minutes ago, drop a thought below. Tell me what invasive species story you think is even stranger than this one, because, honestly, some of them are. And if you'd like to be around when we get to those, you already know the small thing to do. See you down there.